Most of what you've been told about your last name isn't true. The story goes that it's your enslaver's name, a mark left behind by ownership, proof of who once held your family, a direct line back to a specific plantation. It's one of the most widely accepted facts in Black American life. But the people who spend their careers rebuilding these family histories, using both paper records and genetic testing, run into the same problem. Again and again, that story doesn't hold up, and what actually happened is far stranger and far more meaningful than the version most of us grew up believing. This isn't a personal theory. It's the consensus among the people whose job is literally to piece enslaved families back together, record by record. The New York Public Library, one of the country's premier genealogical research institutions, says it plainly. In its official guide to African American genealogy, the assumption that Black families simply inherited their enslaver's surname is a widespread myth, and it's frequently false. Ancestry's own genealogists back this up. So does American Ancestors, and so do the historians working on the large-scale national efforts, racing to document enslaved peoples' identities before the surviving records deteriorate past the point of recovery. Talk to any of them and you'll hear some version of the same tired correction, given by someone who has clearly explained this 100 times before. The truth is messier than the myth and more compelling. So let's break the myth down piece by piece, then look at what genetic testing actually reveals when it goes looking for real ancestors. Because none of this means your surname is meaningless. Quite the opposite, your name has been carrying a truer story than the one you inherited. And it takes both archival records and modern genetics working together to finally hear it. Start with why the myth feels so self-evidently correct, because it isn't baseless. Some enslaved people genuinely did carry an enslaver's surname, and some held on to it after emancipation. And this whole topic touches something raw at the core of Black identity in America. Consider Malcolm X, who rejected his birth surname as a slave name and replaced it with a single letter, a placeholder for the true African name his family lost, and could never reclaim. That idea, carried through the nation of Islam and well beyond it, holds that a name given by your oppressor keeps a quiet hold on you, even generations later. That belief isn't irrational. It comes from something real and horrifying: the deliberate industrial-scale erasure of African names, languages, faiths, and family lines that slavery carried out for centuries, on purpose. So the shorthand version, your name is your master's name, period, took root across Black America and never let go, because believing it feels like an act of remembrance. It feels like honoring the pain. The trouble is that once you actually trace real families, household by household, through the surviving paper trail, that shorthand version collapses almost immediately, and what takes its place is, if anything, a more powerful tribute to those ancestors. Here's the first major problem with the myth, and it isn't a small one. It undermines the whole premise. For the majority of the slavery era, enslaved people weren't assigned surnames at all under the system's logic. A person held as property only needed a single name functionally identical to how livestock or equipment might be labeled. Just enough to be called by surnames were reserved for people with legal recognition, the ability to sign contracts, own property, inherit, testify in court. None of that applied to enslaved people, so the record simply stayed blank across generations. Most enslaved individuals show up in the historical record. On the rare occasion they show up at all as nothing more than a first name next to a monetary value. And even when a family did carry a surname, it often had nothing to do with wherever they ended up. Sales were constant and routine. The entire system depended on it. A single family could be broken apart across 3 or 4 owners. Within 2 generations, a mother sold off to cover a debt. A son sold elsewhere to raise capital. Children passed around like inventory. Whatever surname survived might trace back to an owner from decades before, in an entirely different state, not the place a family finally found itself when freedom arrived. Genealogists see this constantly. Enslaved people living on the exact same plantation at the exact same time, each carrying a completely different surname because each had arrived there from somewhere else entirely. Each name a leftover from a previous sale. Old runaway slave advertisements even reveal this pattern, describing a fugitive as someone who calls himself a certain name, as if the idea that this person might have a surname of their own was almost strange to consider. The name written on plantation paperwork and the name a family actually used among themselves were often 2 completely unrelated things. So the central claim of the myth that your surname traces a clean line to one particular plantation falls apart the moment you remember how constantly and how brutally these families were bought, sold, separated, and scattered. The second problem doesn't just weaken the myth, it turns it on its head entirely. When emancipation finally arrived, one of the very first freedoms formerly enslaved people could exercise ahead of voting rights, ahead of land ownership, ahead of nearly everything else the country was willing to grant them, was the right to choose their own name. And that choice became one of the most significant acts of self-determination in American history. Some kept the name they'd already been known by for entirely practical reasons, not out of any attachment to a former owner. As a formerly enslaved man named Martin Jackson explained years afterward, but because it was the one link that might reconnect family members who had been scattered across a fractured country. But an enormous number of freed people did something very different. They chose deliberately, and often defiantly. Some rejected an enslaver's surname the instant they were free to do so. One formerly enslaved man described adopting his father's surname instead of the man who had merely owned him because his father deserved to be carried forward, not the man who had held him as property. Others invented entirely new names to make a statement: Freeman, Friedman, Newman, names that announced to every clerk, every neighbor, every official record that they belonged to no one anymore. Others still reached for names tied to presidents, revolutionaries, and abolitionists, which is a major reason so many Black American families today are named Washington, Jefferson, or Lincoln. These weren't tributes to the men who had once enslaved them. They were claims staked to an ideal, and some, finally able to make it official, simply wrote down a name their family had quietly held on to and passed along in private for generations, a real family name. The system had never bothered to record for a huge number of Black families. Then, the surname isn't a record of ownership at all. It's a record of the moment an ancestor stepped out from under that ownership and made a choice. Think about what that moment actually meant. These were people who had spent their entire lives having their identity assigned and discarded at someone else's convenience. Suddenly, for the first time, the decision belonged to them. What they chose and what they refused was one of the first genuinely free acts many of them ever got to make, and they filled that choice with meaning, treating a Black family's surname as nothing but leftover residue from an owner erases what might be the single most self-determined decision that family ever made. So where does genetic testing fit into all this? And why can't it ever prove that your surname connects to a specific plantation? No matter what some ads claim, picture the challenge the way genealogists themselves have to picture it. Imagine a mirror shattered into thousands of fragments, scattered across a continent, the descendants of one enslaved woman, spread across a century and a half, living in cities that have no connection to one another. No single fragment reflects her whole face, but patiently gather enough pieces, fit their broken edges together, and her image gradually starts to reappear. That's essentially what DNA testing does. It has nothing to do with reading a surname. It can't detect one at all. What it actually finds are genetic relatives, living descendants who share ancestry with you, measured by exactly how much DNA you have in common. Geneticists call these shared segments identity by descent chromosome fragments passed down intact from a common ancestor. The more DNA shared, the closer the relationship and the more recent the shared ancestor. Here's how that reconstructs what the records tried to erase. Say you and a total stranger, living 1,000 miles apart, both descend from the same enslaved woman, and neither of you knows she ever existed. Your DNA will still show that connection, a shared relative, sitting somewhere in both of your family trees. If that stranger's family tree, or a separate match, connects to a surviving document, a Freedmen's Bureau record, Iowa listing enslaved people alongside furniture and livestock, a plantation ledger, a probate filing, a skilled genealogist can then triangulate across multiple matches and trace backward to the shared ancestor, sometimes down to the exact location where she was enslaved. That's the actual process behind recovering these lost identities. It's slow, painstaking work, and it has returned names to families that slavery worked deliberately to erase. But notice how it works through a network of genetic cousins, cross-referenced against surviving documents. It doesn't run through the name on your birth certificate. In fact, that surname is often less a key and more an obstacle standing between you and the truth. And here's the real reversal, the part that flips the myth completely. Time and time again, when DNA enters the picture, it doesn't confirm a surname's connection to a plantation. It disproves it. It shows, unambiguously, that the man whose name of family has carried for generations was never part of their bloodline at all, that the real ancestry runs somewhere else entirely, a different family, a different location, a different owner, or a father the historical record was designed to hide. Remember how the system worked. Enslaved status passed through the mother, and enslaved women were routinely assaulted by white men owners, overseers and owners' adult sons, none of whom appear anywhere in records connected to the children that resulted, because there was neither legal obligation nor personal willingness to acknowledge them. So someone might carry a single surname on paper for 150 years, while their DNA quietly points to an entirely different white family nearby, or to a completely separate owner in another state decades earlier, or to a black father whose identity was deliberately scrubbed from every surviving document. DNA is the one source in this entire story that can't be silenced, destroyed, or coerced into lying. It simply reports what happened. So when you hear someone claim with total certainty that their DNA confirmed their surname's connection to a plantation, understand that they've got it backwards. The far more common outcome is the reverse DNA exposes the surname as a false lead, created by a sale, a renaming, an enslaver's hidden crime, or an ancestor's own deliberate choice. and then, gradually through matches and documentation, reveals the real story that had been hiding underneath it all along. This is exactly the kind of widely accepted, everybody knows this belief this channel exists to dismantle, not the version that's easy to click on, but the one that actually holds up against a real record and treats the people involved as more than a talking point. There are entire silences built into this country's official story, and most of them were placed there deliberately by people who didn't want anyone looking too closely. If that's the kind of history you're here for, stick around and subscribe. Now, a necessary caution, because getting this wrong in the other direction would just replace one myth with another, and that's not the goal here. The myth being false doesn't mean your surname is meaningless. Dismissing it entirely would be its own mistake, the opposite extreme of the original error. Your last name is still a legitimate clue, usually the first thing a competent genealogist checks. Some families genuinely did retain an owner's surname across generations. Some enslaved families used a consistent name well before emancipation. Sometimes the name really does lead somewhere accurate. The mistake was never in examining the name, it was in trusting it uncritically, assuming it automatically points to a specific enslaver or plantation, and building an entire family narrative on an unverified guess. A surname is where the research begins, not where it's allowed to end as a starting clue. It's genuinely useful. Treated as a final conclusion, it will confidently lead you to the wrong family entirely. And to be equally direct about DNA, there is no test that scans a surname and outputs a plantation's name. What actually exists is careful, time-intensive human research matching genetic cousins, analyzing clusters, triangulating results against fragile surviving documents like Freedmen's Bureau files, slave schedules, wills, and estate records. This process genuinely works, and it has recovered names and identities that paper records alone never could. But it takes months, sometimes years, not an instant printout, the day your test results arrive. Anyone promising an instant, one-click answer connecting your name to a specific plantation is selling the same old myth in different packaging. So here's the fuller picture. This isn't just a correction. It hands something back that the myth had been quietly taking away. The myth framed your name as a brand, something chosen for your family by the person who owned them, permanently tying you backward to a master and a plantation. It's a narrative that keeps the enslaver present in your life indefinitely, as though he's still holding the pen, and for some families, part of that really is accurate, and that reality deserves honesty, not avoidance. But for a great many families, the documentary and genetic evidence together tell a very different story. The instant they were allowed to, your ancestors took hold of that pen themselves. They kept a name so scattered relatives could find each other again. They discarded a name to reject the man who had claimed ownership over them. They chose a father's name, a hero's name, a name that simply meant freedom. More often than most people realize, the surname you carry isn't your ancestor's owner's signature, it's your ancestor's own. Quite possibly the first thing they ever got to sign as a free person, in their own name. And if you genuinely want to trace the plantation your family survived, that's still possible. But DNA is the way and not the surname. The path runs through thousands of genetic relatives you've never met, and through fragile records that still hold, in faded handwriting, exactly who endured what. A name by itself won't get you there. Your DNA carefully matched against theirs can. So yes, nearly everything you were taught about your surname's history is inaccurate, but the actual truth is better. The myth handed you a burden and called it heritage. The truth hands you a decision your ancestor made in their first moments of freedom, and a real path toward finding the rest of your family. One of those weighs you down. The other is the exact tool used to break free of it. Next time we take that same method, genetic matches, cross-referenced records, and follow it across the ocean, past the plantation, past the auction block, past the Middle Passage itself, into the specific West African regions that Black American DNA repeatedly traces back to, including the Kingdom of Congo, a sophisticated kingdom with its own monarchy, written language, cathedrals, and diplomats corresponding with European courts as equals, generations before the first slave ship ever reached those shores. Your surname was only the first step off the porch, the beginning of a much longer trail. The real journey stretches far beyond it, back across an ocean, into a homeland that was never truly lost, only obscured. And DNA is finally mapping the whole route. Subscribe, and we'll trace it all the way back.